Hey everybody, in this video we're going to take a look at the basics of broadcast transition logic in Unreal Engine 5.5. This is a really powerful feature that allows for very complicated and elaborate motion graphics to be done in a broadcast setting, and you can just play them straight out of Unreal Engine for live streams and broadcasts, live events on site, etc. And given the power of all of this, I thought, well, let's just start with the basics and get into a full series on this and gradually build up to more and more powerful versions of our graphics. So this will be a simple starting point to explain how transition logic works. And just an illustration of what it is here is I've got this window open, is called the rundown window, and it is intended to play a rundown playlist of pages of graphics for a show, ostensibly, right? So let me just preview out. So we don't have anything going out in our preview. And here's the asset itself in my project. So this is the Motion Design Rundown asset. I named it RD Show 1, so RD for Rundown, and then Show 1. And I could have many different playlists for different shows. Now this playlist is using only a single Unreal Engine Motion Design level as its only template. So this level is called L3 Basic, and so here it is a level, and here it is open, and it's just got a very simple graphic. But there are 3 different animations built into this level, and also this level is designated as being layer L3. So if I preview in, what we get is this animation where the video plays out, having the bar come up from the bottom and then extend, and then the graphic, the text appears. And this is all happening on what the rundown system will consider as layer L3, and I'm just using L3 to designate lower thirds. If I had another layer that was maybe a clock or a bug that's in the corner up here, I would give that a different layer, maybe clock bug or something like that. If I wanted a slab or tombstone of information to appear in the upper right hand corner, I might call it slab, or I might call it UR for upper right. In any case, in this example, we're just going to use a single layer, L3, and the importance of this is that right now I have one layer that's already in our graphic. If I hit preview next, I don't want this to go out with the out animation. I don't want the new one to come in with the in animation. I want to play a change animation that transitions from one page to the next. So if I preview next, what we'll see is the text fades out, the color changes, and the new text fades in. So that is different than the out animation and the in animation. So that is a change animation. Preview next. So those are 3 animations that are embedded into this motion design level that can be played out. And then transition logic itself is Unreal's system for evaluating what's our situation, what do we have live on our broadcast channel right now, or in this case our preview channel, what's active now and what is coming in, so therefore what needs to go out. And transition logic, if you want to see what that looks like, I can just right click on any one of these pages and choose open transition logic, and this shows you essentially the decision tree. So in this case, if the same scene, meaning the L3 basic, is in the same layer, which is that L3 layer, and I'm transitioning out, play a change animation, and there's specifications as to what to do in playing that play out. If I'm transitioning in, then I want to wait for anything else to happen. So if anything needs to go out, let it go out first, and then I'm going to play that change animation, but I have a different set of specifications as to how I'm going to play that out. And if I'm looking at the channel and there is a different scene in the same layer, or there's no scenes in the same layer, well, in that case, if I'm transitioning out, I'm going to play my out animation. If I'm transitioning in, I'm going to play my in animation. So this is the basic transition logic tree, and this is the default tree that is built into Unreal. And so this is what we're going to be looking at, building from scratch, so that we can get an understanding of all the basics of this. So let's go ahead and start from scratch. So I'll close this rundown, and I'm just saying yes to closing out. We're playing something out of a channel, and yes, I just wanted to go and stop. So right click and delete that rundown playlist, and I want to delete this level, but it's open. So what I'm going to do is right click and create a new empty level. So I'm selecting level and typing in empty, And I'll do MD as a suffix just because I will make it a motion design level to use later. And hit enter, Control S to save it. And then I can double click to open that up. And now that the L3 basic level has been closed, I can go ahead and right click and delete it from my project. And while I'm still here in my empty level, I'm going to click on the motion design button to activate the motion design features for this level. So now I can go back to content browser. This has been changed, so I'll select Control S to save it. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and delete this demo motion design tags asset that I created. And that's really where we designate all our levels, but I want to show this from scratch. So I'll right click and delete and force that deletion. Okay, so let's start out by creating our graphics level. So I'll right click and create a new level. And again, I'll call this L3 demo. Control S to save it, double click to open, and I will activate motion design with the motion design button. Now this motion design button, of course, is only active if you've got the motion design plugin on. So I'm assuming you've already gotten that far. If you haven't and you don't have that motion design button, you can click on edit here and go to plugins and make sure that you search for the motion design plugin and turn it on. So I'm typing in the word motion in the search, and here is motion design, and you'll check that. And then of course also I like to have Storm Sync on with motion design so I can save out assets and share them really easily. With those two activated, you'll end up with a restart button, and click that to restart Unreal, and then you're all set in terms of plugins to close that down. Now, one other note is that the motion design button actually ends up having a different name if the Unreal Engine window is too wide to display it. So if I were to just collapse my window here, you see that that motion design button has disappeared. When I click this little arrow, this says deactivate scene in the case right now where I have motion design activated. If I do that, are you sure? Yes. Okay. So now I still have L3 demo open, but motion design is no longer active, right? If I display it, I could push it to activate motion design. So in this case, if the window is too small and it's not showing up, the activate is just called activate scene. There we go. And that it brings back our motion design. So just wanted to point that out for anyone that might be using a larger font sizes or smaller window in their Unreal Engine. Okay, so we have the L3 demo level created, motion design is activated, and I'll go ahead and Control S to save it. There we go. And so let's start by adding our default motion design setup. So I'm going to use the Create Defaults button here in the motion design panel and activate that. I don't usually use the directional light in here, so I'm just going to uncheck it. You can keep it if you want. But spawn means I'm going to create all of these things in my motion design level. So I spawn these things, and here we can see in the regular outliner, all of those things are showing. I'm not sure why my motion design outliner doesn't automatically open when I open and close different levels. So I'm just going to bring back the motion design outliner by going to Window and choosing Motion Design Outliner and just selecting the first option there. And so now I've got my Motion Design Outliner, which is a nicer little hierarchy view. Persistent level refers to this L3 demo, and the default scene is what I created with that Create Defaults button, and it gave me a camera, a post-process volume, and a skylight, and that's all I need for that. So I'll do Control-Shift-S to make sure everything is saved. Right now, I usually work to have my safe areas displayed, and that is this button in the viewport. So if you've created this and you are looking through your Ava Cine camera actor, but you don't see the safe zones delineated here, there's this button here that's a square with a star in it, and this activates that display. We can adjust these safe zones if we'd like. We can go to the Edit menu and Editor Preferences. And in Editor Preferences, just scroll down until you see Motion Design, and then look for Viewport there. When we click on the Viewport tab, we have a whole set of properties that we can adjust. And scrolling down in here, there is a section for safe frames. So of course they're active, so we can toggle them on and off. They each have a color assigned, there's a thickness assigned, and there is a percentage of how much of the screen they occupy. So the outer square is 90% and the inner is 80%. And so this is where you can adjust that if you would like to. So now that I have my level created, motion design is active, I can start building up my graphic itself. So I'm just going to double click on the 2D shapes for the rectangle tool. So double click rectangle, and now I have a rectangle. Clicking that, I can go into my details for that. I'm going to deactivate a search I had in there from previously. We have a couple things that we could adjust here, and I've got the mesh size, and right now that's combined, so meaning that the height and width are connected to one another. So if I adjust one, I'm adjusting both, and that's why we end up with a square. But if I click here, I can choose free to unlock the two from each other. And so now I can adjust the width independent of the height, and the height independent of the width. So now I have a nice little bar that I can put behind my text. I can move this bar down, and I might want to add a little bit of kind of angling to the edges. So there's a left slant and a right slant. So maybe I'll have the left slant to the right and also the right slant to the right. I'm just going to do 30 as a value for each of these. So now we've got kind of a little bit of character to that shape. And I will go and set a basic color here. So I'll just scroll down and change this from white to making this like a blue. Okay. And I'm going to use unlit, so I'm not worried about the skylight lighting this, and this will mean that whatever color I put into this solid ultimately be the color of the bar itself. So we're just doing some really basic graphics here. Okay, so now this is my background bar. Over here in my Motion Design Outliner, I'll select that rectangle and tap F2, and now I can rename this and say that this will be my L3 bar. Then I want to have some text displayed over that. Text is available in the Motion Design tool palette under Actors. Actors, just anything in a level is an actor, and so I want a text actor, so I'll double click on that. And there's my text. I can select that, and over in the details, I'm going to go ahead and scroll up and make sure that text is centered. I'll go ahead and select a font for that. In this case, I'll do Arial Rounded, and I'll move that in place at the rectangle. Now, one thing to know is that our scene here is a full three-dimensional scene. So even though we're working in a 2D view right now, there is 3D space front to back that we can't see when we're looking through our camera actor. So if I go ahead and have my mouse in the viewport, click the viewport and tap the C key, now I'm in my perspective camera, and I'm just using Alt, my right mouse button, to push my mouse away from me and kind of pull away from the scene. Again, Alt and my left mouse button lets me pivot. And you can see that as we do this, the text is kind of getting a little jumbled up in our 3D scene with the rectangle. And that's because in the 3D space, they occupy exactly the same plane. They're on top of each other. They're occupying the same depth. So what I want to do is bring this text a little bit in front of that rectangle. So I'll select the text, and we can see RGB, red, green, blue, is XYZ. So the X-axis is the one that defines our front to back. And so the location of the text is -0. If I click on the rectangle, the location of the rectangle is also -0. They're in the same space. So clicking the text, I'm just going to bring it forward 1 centimeter. 1 unit in Unreal Engine is a centimeter. And notice that this arrow, this red arrow, is pointing to the back. That means positive values are to the back. So negative values will bring things closer to the camera in this case. So I'll type in -1 here in my location, and I'll hit enter. And now that text is 1 centimeter in front of the rectangle, and we're good with being able to see the text clearly from any angle because it's resting just in front of that rectangle. So again, I can click in my viewport and tap C to jump back into my rendering camera, and the text looks clear. I don't want this text to be floating over the rectangle though. I want it to look like it's enveloped by it. So I'm going to click the text, and my scaling is locked so that I can click any one of these values and drag and reduce the size of the text. So vertically it fits in, and we're all set. So this is the basis for our graphics. So I'll hit Control-Shift-S to save that. And maybe I want to group these and also rename my text actor. So I'll select the text actor, tap F2, and call this L3 text. And I'll select both of these objects in the outliner and use Control-G to group them under a null. And this null, again, I'll F2 and give that a name of L3 GRP for my lower third group. And maybe finally, I'll just color code this with blue. And so now these are color coded blue, and I'll be able to find those really easily. Maybe let's collapse that default scene. Okay, so I've got the basis for the graphic. Now we want to talk about the different animations that are needed. Remember, there were 3 different animations that we need to have. One is for transitioning in, one for transitioning out, and then one for transitioning as a change between 2 different copies of this same level. So if I go to the sequencer, and this is where we manage our animations, I can expand this panel here on the left, the sequence panel, and this is where our different sequences will be listed. I like to keep this default sequence and just call it layout. And so I'm going to select this sequence and have F2. This is our default one. And I'm just going to call this layout and Control-Shift-S to save all my changes. And this way I can always go to my layout sequence just to see what this graphic should look like whenever it's all the way displayed. Because as I go into my transition sequences, in, out, and change, there could be various states for all of these graphics, and it's difficult to see, well, what's the static design of this? So that's the use for layout for me. And so now I'll expand sequences again and add 3 more sequences. So I'm going to click this add button 3 times, 1, 2, 3. And then there are some template sequence designators, tags and such for the sequences for in, out, and change. So if I right click, I can apply a preset for in, and that labels this as in, as well as it sets a special tag for this sequence. So if I select in and I go to settings here, you see that there is a tag created for in. And so if I go back to my tree, I can right click and say apply a preset for out. Now it's named out and it has a tag for out. And finally, this last sequence will be changed. And again, if I go select sequence, I haven't applied the template. I go to settings. There's no tags here. If I go back, right click, apply preset, change. And now I've got a tag for change and we're all set. One of the interesting things here for change is besides this tag being added, I also have a marker in the middle. And that is so that the default transition logic can work because it uses playing from the beginning and then stopping at this A mark as transitioning out, and then starting at the A mark and playing out the rest of the sequence to transition in. So let's take care of this transition first since we're on it. What I'm going to do is we start out having our text fully visible and we want it to fade out. So I'm going to select my text, I'll go over to details, and I'm going to look for my translucency setting here. Here it is under style, translucency style. I will change that from none to translucent, and I'm going to set that opacity all the way up to 1, meaning 100% solid, and I will set a keyframe with this diamond here. So my playhead is on the very first frame, frame 0, and opacity is here, and I'll click to add a keyframe, and now I've got a keyframe for the text opacity. I want this to be quick, so I'm going to drag this marker to frame 15, and I want everything to be faded out before we get to frame 15. So bringing my playhead here, selecting my text again, and again, looking for that translucency value. Here it is. I'm just going to drag this down to 0. Now I have auto keyframing on, so I'm just type in 0 here. As soon as I changed this value that already had a key set, the key was automatically placed. By default, that's not necessarily on, and so where you can find that setting is here in our sequencer panel. There is this diamond that designates the different styles of keyframing. So by default, this looks like an X and it's off. I usually activate auto keying as one of the first things I do and when I've got a new version of Unreal. So with auto keying on, anytime I make an adjustment to a value that already has a key, let's go back here. This is point something 7. So let's hit 0. Now we're really at 0. Move my playhead to the after the A mark, because then when I want to fade in, I want to start my animation at the mark A and play out to the end. So I'll keyframe this 0 value and then go up to just before frame 30, and I'll just click and drag here this time and bring that up to 1. And again, I've got an automated key. Now the text is visible, and I can drag the end of the sequence designation to right there. So now I've got this animation. If I go to the beginning and push play, it plays out and it fades out the text, and then it fades in the text. So there's my change animation. Now that exists. Let's go ahead and look at our sequences and work on the others. By the way, if I'm initially setting these up and I'm going to be switching back and forth between these sequences often, we can click this Dock Tab button, and that will lock this tab in place here on the side of the sequencer panel. And it's just in the sequencer panel, right? So I can go to Content Browser, Remote Control, and Sequencer, and it only shows up in Sequencer. Okay, so change is done. Let's do our out transition animation now. So again, this is our default space where our graphic is already in place. So for transitioning out, I want to basically fade out the text, collapse the rectangle, and send it out the left side of the screen. So I'll start by selecting my rectangle, and here I'll make sure I set a keyframe for its location. And I'll also set a keyframe for its width as well. So that should be right here. So I'll set a keyframe here. And so now we've got keys for those. And also I'm going to fade out the text before moving that rectangle. So selecting the text, and again, finding our opacity translucence and keying it at 100%. We'll fade out the text first. So about 13 frames in, I'll go ahead and enter a 0 in for opacity. Auto key gave me the key. I want to keep the rectangle in place for all this, so I'm just going to set another key for both the width up here, mesh size, width keyframe, and location keyframe. And from here, I just want this to shoot out the left side while it's shrinking. So I'll just go up to a little bit before frame 30, and I'll just take the width here and drag it in so that it's just a small shape. Let's set this width to 52. Let's just say 50. Okay, and so that gave us a key for that, and then I will send it out the left side, and we have a key for that. Now, with those two, we only keyed the single value that we changed. So if I expand transform, for example, and then location, you see we have keyframes for X and Z, and then only Y has a keyframe here. So if I want to, I could key all of these by going to this transform and clicking this, and then I can click this here for mesh size as well, since there's a vertical and a horizontal. Okay, so again, I can drag this ending to frame 30, and now this animation's ready. I could go to the beginning, and I can use my animation sequence selector here, and I can play that. You know, I can select change, play that. So we're in good shape. Now the only thing I need to do is my in transition logic. So let's select the in. This time, I want things to end here at our finished layout. So I'm actually going to move my playhead out, let's just say to a little bit before frame 45, and I'm going to key the text should be 100% opaque, so we'll set a keyframe for that. And the rectangle should be in place, so we will key its mesh size, and we will key its location. And now I want to go earlier in the animation. I want to fade the text into visibility, so I'm just going to go here to frame 30 and set our text opacity to 0. And then I also want to key my mesh size and my transform, and then we'll have the text, the rectangle actually, we want it to come up and then expand. So first I'm going to shrink it down earlier in the animation, so we'll just animate our mesh size, and again we'll just type in 50 here. So that is keyed, and I'll key my mesh size. And then I want to also key my transform so it holds in place. And next I'll want to start out with this out of frame below the screen. And so we have a keyframe for that. All right, great. So now this in animation comes up from the bottom, expands and displays. We have our out animation, and we have our change animation. So all of our animations are set. Let me just make sure I remembered to, no, I didn't. Let's just get the end of this animation set. And we've got our 3 animations that we need for our transition logic. So now to finish this up, we want to activate transition logic. And that's going to mean designating what layer this whole level is going to be about. So let me go to my content browser and create a list of motion design tags that will be our layer designations. So I'll right click in our content browser, go to motion design, and choose Motion Design Tag Collection. So we've got that asset. I'll call this MDT for Motion Design Tag, and I'll just call this Layer Tags. Control S to save, double click to open it up, and I'm just going to add a tag for my lower thirds, so L3, and enter, and save and close. So now that that L3 exists in the tags, here in my level editor, I can go to Transition Logic, click on this little ellipsis, and select this asset and assign a layer. So right now there's no asset by default. I click on that, and I'm going to choose my MDT layer tags, and then I have my L3 to choose from. So now this is in layer 3, and finally I want to enable my transition logic, and I'm going to keep the default transition logic, but if I want to review it, I can click here on transition logic, and sure enough, I've got if the same scene already exists in this layer. So that means if the L3 demo scene exists in layer 3, then if I'm transitioning out, I'm going to play change. And again, transitioning out means I'm going to play the beginning of that change animation. So I will start, I'm not designating any start, it'll start at the default start, but I'm going to stop at mark A. If I'm transitioning in, I'm going to wait for everything else to happen first. So if there's another layer in the way, it needs to play its exit first, so it's change. And then once that's all done, then I can go ahead and play my change. But this task here of playing is going to start at mark A and then just play out to the default end in the forward direction. Meanwhile, if no scene for this layer is in place, or even if there is a scene in this layer but it's a different scene, what I'm going to do is either transition in which case I'm just going to play the in animation and whatever sequence has the tag of in, and if I'm transitioning out, I'm playing whatever sequence has the tag of out. So again, these tags for either a change or an out or an in, they're designated when we set up our animations and used the apply preset, and that preset added the tag to the sequence here in the settings. So that should be it, and we've got a status of a check mark. I can compile and save. So all of our transition logic for this level is now set up, and we can put it to use, except for I haven't defined which parts of this level can I adjust in the rundown so that I can have different information, different colors in our pages. And we designate those fields essentially with the remote control window. There's a few different panels here, and essentially a property is something that's on our actors, in our motion graphics that we can change. A controller is how we actually go about changing that. And then this panel is for binding, and this is what we're binding to, or how do we connect our controller to our property. So let's go through this for the text first. So let me bring up my layout sequence and see this is where it comes in handy. Go to the tree and click layout. Now I can see all my actors. Going into remote control, I will select the text. I want to add this text value as a property to the remote control that I can adjust from page to page. So I'm going to click this little button. This is supposed to be the side view of a game video controller, like an old Atari joystick. So if I click on this, now the property is added. I can give it a property name. Maybe I call it text1. And the current value is text. And now I can create a controller for it by just clicking this and dragging it into controller. Text properties work really nicely that way, and as a result of doing that, clicking and dragging, this new controller is automatically bound to this text property. So all we're doing here is we have a text controller, and maybe I just call this L3 text as the controller ID. This is what will be displayed in our rundown as a template value that we can change. And then finally it's designated, this is binding to this text property right here. Okay, so we also would like to adjust the color of this bar. So I select the bar and scroll down to find the color, and likewise we'll click this game controller, and now it's in here. Now for some reason if I click and drag a color into controller, it doesn't automatically create a controller for us. By the way, for that click and drag, make sure you click here in the text. Don't click the color, because if you click the color you'll get this window. So I'm clicking here and clicking and dragging, nothing happens. Okay, so what we want to do is create a color controller. So I'll hit plus here, choose color, Now I've got a color controller, and now I can click and drag, and I'm just going to drop this on this color controller. And so now this color controller is bound to this property. And finally, I don't want to leave this black, so I'm just going to click here and choose a nice dark blue. Desaturate a little bit, darken. Yeah, let's keep it saturated but dark. Okay, so this is my default setup for my controllers, and now these two controllers will be available in our rundown playlist so that we can change these values from page to page. And I think if I double click here to change the description, I can say this is the text, and double click here, this is the color. Okay, and click away to save that. And so Control-Shift-S to save all of this. And so now our level is completely set up. So in Sequencer, we have our different sequences that animate the actors that we created. In Transition Logic, we've designated a level. Transition Logic is activated, and we have Transition Logic set to all the defaults. And then we have our fields set up with controllers that are bound to some properties in our graphics. So now we can put this to use in a rundown for motion design. So I'll go back to my content browser, right click, and I will go to Motion Design Rundown, and this is my playlist, so I'll call this RD for Rundown _, and I'll just call this Show 1 with the idea that I might have many other shows. Control-S to save, and double-click to open it up. All right, we don't have anything in here, so I'm going to take my L3 demo, drag it into the Templates panel, and we can see that it is a panel, and it is available, and it is this asset L3 demo, and L3 is the layer that it's in as designated by our transition logic. So now we can make our first page from that. I can either hit plus for create page, or I can just drag and drop. And for our first page, here we have our controllers, L3 text, and the color. So I'll just call this the first page. And we'll leave the color blue, and we can test it out by clicking preview in. And so it animates up, and it didn't save. Let's double click on here and say, this is page 1, and make sure I hit enter. There we go. So now that text is saved, and I can play that out, and I can preview it in, and we can play it out. And so we're seeing those two different animations. By the way, this window jumps around because the layer status indicator pops up when there's nothing available. Preview out, that panel goes collapses to nothing, and if I preview in, it expands because we've added this layer. So that this window doesn't jump around, I actually like to take this layer status panel and put it here to the right of our pages. So now as these layers get revealed, then it's just extending vertically in here, and this window doesn't jump around. So I can preview out, and now, yeah, this is much more friendly. So I'm just going to use it this way. And now we could create another version of this page. So I could select this page and Control D to duplicate it, and double click and make sure this is page 2. And maybe I'll change this to purple. Or I could just drag another one of these down here and select this and say that this is page 3. And I will make this amber. And instead of preview in, I can say preview next, and this should just fade out the text and fade it in. Wonderful. And so you get the idea. If I want to get this out, I can preview out. I think if I double click, yep, preview's in, fun stuff. Continue, I think, is playing the next thing. Nope, this would continue a paused animation. We'll get into that later. But that's it. This is the basics of our transition logic. So we're able to transition between different things. You can see this status indicator is working. And then one other little tip here is that we can see our transition logic tree in operation by right-clicking on one of these pages and choosing Open Transition Logic, and opening our transition logic page and activating debug. And what this will do, let me just tear this page out so it's independent, and I'll just put it over here so I can see all our transition logic. And go back to rundown. And now if I preview out, what we should see is indicators that the layer is being transitioned out. So preview out, and there we go. Our indicators that the root happened, this got activated because nothing is overlapping, and we transitioned out. So if I select this and transition in, we should see that, all right, this happened, and then, well, there's no other scenes in this layer. There's no other scenes in this same layer, and we're transitioning in, so we should play in. So we should see an indicator next to root, and next to here, and next to here. If we preview in, there we go. Everything worked, and it all worked and happened. If we do a change, what we should see is this branch happens because there is a scene in the same layer, and we'll see a set of indicators for this first page that will be transitioning out, and we'll see another set of indicators for the new page that's transitioning in. So if I go ahead and preview next to transition those in, we've got our outs and our ins. And there you go. That's the basics of transition logic. And this is the foundation for loads of really complicated motion graphics. And so we'll get into those in future tutorials. Until next time, have fun.